Hey everyone, this is a VoD review of Golden Guardians versus TSM. I'm John Valentine, and let's get into it. So, looking at these team compositions, GGS has what I would consider kind of a classic Vayne comp, in that Vayne is a very powerful champion if you are able to get to a point where your team is ahead. That basically means having pressure in the side lanes and in team fights, having your top laner and mid laner be able to exert enough pressure, enough damage threat onto the enemy team that the enemy team has to react to your solo laners, and the Vayne can therefore be able to free hit to some extent. So Golden Guardians has been able to set up that kind of a team fight and a composition that tries to play towards that end fairly well. They have the Aatrox Vladimir matchup in the top lane that is a winning top lane matchup, and Aatrox is able to put out a tremendous amount of threat onto the enemy backline. Swain in the mid lane, also favored against Lissandra, also able to put out a tremendous amount of threat inside of a team fight. The main concession that Golden Guardians made to get two winning solo lanes is they lost their jungle matchup. This is kind of a necessity if you are specifically playing on blue side. I didn't watch the draft with you guys, but what basically happened in the draft was Golden Guardians locked the Aatrox early, and then TSM saved their top lane pick for last pick, red side, which is traditional, to see if Golden Guardians were maybe thinking of putting the Aatrox jungle and picking some different top laner. And Golden Guardians locked in the Poppy, which I believe is really intelligent because it basically says, okay, you can no longer pick Riven, which is one of the primary counters to Aatrox. It is something that TSM has played into Aatrox before. But if you pick Riven into a Poppy, you're going to lose top lane really bad. So by locking the Poppy, Golden Guardians basically, okay, you can no longer pick Riven. So TSM was forced into picking some other top laner that is viable into both Aatrox and Poppy, and fortunately for Golden Guardians, that is a very limited pool. So they end up taking the Vladimir, and as a result, end up with a losing top lane as the red side. This is fine though. Vladimir, while he does lose lane, and to some extent does play into Golden Guardians' hands in that GGS needs to win top and mid lane, Vladimir also scales really, really well, is really strong into Vayne because he is capable of getting on top of the Vayne and really kind of pressuring her out of a fight. So the Vladimir pick, yes, it allows Golden Guardian, because of picking the Poppy jungle and allowing themselves to have this kind of weaker jungle matchup, Golden Guardians was able to get those winning side lanes that they needed. And TSM is still going to be able to have threat onto the Vayne, even though they lost these side lanes because of the more aggressive jungle pick that they got, and because Vladimir in team fights is a menace, especially targeting AD carries such as Vayne. So, going into this game, we really want to be seeing Golden Guardians winning their side lanes. We really want to see Golden Guardians, especially Contracts, shutting down Acadian aggression. We want to see Contracts focusing basically time wherever Acadian is, to not let Acadian snowball the bot lane and not let Acadian kind of turn these two winning side lane matchups into losing matchups through jungle pressure. Right off the bat, Frog and Dice and Acadian gank. Already, things are going kind of completely sideways for Golden Guardians, and this should be honestly really predictable on the side of TSM. So Imagine your Rek'Sai, right? Top lane is shoved to here. It's Vladimir Aatrox lane. There is a 0% chance there's anything to be accomplished in that top lane, right? Bottom lane, basically the same deal. Kalista isn't level 6, right? Vayne has cleanse and heal available to her. There isn't a reasonable level 3 dive in the bottom lane. So the mid lane is the only place that Acadian can really be looking to accomplish much. And yeah, if you're Contracts, you can say, I'm farming, he's probably farming too, so I don't need to be by my lanes. But basically, looking at the map in that situation, okay, gonna go over this play in a little bit, but looking at the map going into that mid lane gank, mid lane is kind of the only place Acadian could be looking to make an aggressive play. So Contracts should be prepared for that, and Froggen should be prepared for that. Yes, if Acadian is actually farming and chooses not to go mid lane because the lane is fairly shoved, yes, Contracts hovering mid to make a counter gank there, and Froggen playing back does, to some extent, give Bjergsen a reprieve in the losing matchup. It does mean that Contract is going to fall behind Acadian in farm. But as Contracts, your job isn't to farm up to the same level that the Rek'Sai is. Your job isn't to be gold equal with the Rek'Sai. Your job is to stop the Rek'Sai from snowballing and provide a lot of utility by being tanky and having this utility-filled kit in the mid and late game. So Contracts should be perfectly willing to go behind a few camps to hover his lanes and make sure that Acadian isn't able to make these plays happen. And looking at the map right there, mid lane was the only place a play could have occurred, so mid lane is kind of where he should have been. To the same extent, Froggen should have just played a little bit further back. Obviously, he died, burned 2 flashes for 1 flash, but really not what you want to see out of GGS. GGS needs to be winning these side lanes. If they lose pressure on the map, the Vayne is going to have a very difficult time being impactful. Now, we're going to look at this bot lane play that we're about to get kind of catapulted into. So, starting off, the goal for the GGS bot lane is to not lose very hard. Already, they gave up Kalista, who is incredibly powerful, into Vayne, so it's already not going to be easy for them. Now, Ole has stepped forward to get a ward into this bush for whatever reason, presumably because with the size of this minion wave, it is likely to start shoving back into TSM soon, and they don't want to have to walk up the lane with this bush unwarded. So it to some extent makes sense for GGS to want to push a little bit forward and ward this bush while they have this giant minion wave that would aid them in a fight. But the amount of basically advantage in this 2v2 for the Kalista is pretty extreme, and walking face first into a taunt is not really what you want. Yes, there's a world in which Smoothie messes up the dash timing and Ollie's able to W back to Deathly. That's not likely. So if you're Ollie walking up toward this bush, you're basically signing up to take a huge chunk for this bush ward. And maybe that's necessary, but I don't think it really is. You would be better off losing the few CS that you would by having to stay back because you don't have vision of this bush than taking this huge chunk and losing really the ability to approach the wave at all. So anyway, we're going to see Ollie get taunted here. We're going to see back up that was farther than I wanted to back up. Ollie gets taunted. Definitely kind of dicks around for the beginning of this. Yes, reaction speed and all that, but there is a world in which Deathly instantly condemns Sven away, and Sven is then unable to contribute very much DPS to hitting Ollie, and then Ollie can just W away and be fine, right? Instead, Deathly tries to trade back onto the Kalista. This is already something you should not expect to go well. Yes, Braum is tankier than Kalista is, but Kalista puts out a lot more DPS, and there is currently really a split focus on GGS. Ole is hitting Smoothie / trying to walk away, and Deathly is hitting Zen, while both of the TSM bottom laners are hitting Ole. And there just is such a power advantage on the side of TSM that trying to trade back here and get an even trade isn't going to work out. You were signing up to take a chunk to get this bush ward. So that should be your goal. That is what you were planning on, basically. That should be what you play towards. So definitely should be just trying to disengage, except that Ollie is going to get chunked out by 1 or 2 Sven autos and the Galio damage. But is going to be ultimately fine. Instead, definitely gets greedy, tries to trade back onto Sven to try and, I guess, retain some sort of health advantage. And as a result, definitely isn't standing in a place where Ollie can W2 him to get away to safety. He doesn't condemn Sven until it is way too late to stop any of the auto stack. Maybe the condemn was on cooldown. We didn't see the state of the lane before. He might have used it earlier, in which case GGS really should not have been going for that bush ward. But really just pure mistakes, micro mistakes out of Golden Guardians that are going to cost them really the Vayne's ability to survive in this lane. Now, if you're TSM, your game plan going into this game is shut down the side lane advantages for Golden Guardians, take advantage of the fact you have a stronger early game jungler to make aggressive plays in the side lanes, and try to snowball bottom lane to a point that is unrecoverable. Because the Golden Guardians team composition basically really needs to be ahead. And they are set up to do that in the side lanes. However, if Deathly loses bottom lane so hard that that loss is greater than the wins in the side lanes, in the solo lanes, that's not going to matter. Your team is still going to be behind. So Acadian's job is shut down the Golden Guardians leads in the solo lanes and try and snowball the bottom lane as much as possible. He has already had a successful gank in the mid lane. There is a gold advantage on Bjergsen, which there should not be. He has, and Deathly and Ollie have seeded a ton of pressure in the bottom lane, losing a turret plate already because Ollie misstepped and Deathly microed the play. Infernal Drake spawns, really unlucky for Golden Guardians. There was no world in which they were going to get it with these team compositions. So the fact that it is going to be not just one Infernal, but soon a second, in 5 minutes, a second Infernal before the laning phase ends, is really terrible luck for Golden Guardians. And we're seeing right now, these solo lane picks for TSM are really, really safe, right? It's very difficult to make much of a play happen onto Vladimir. He's able to pull out of the chains from Aatrox. He is very safe within a dive. Same is true with Lissandra. She has the ultimate to stasis herself. She has a really long-range escape tool that isn't stopped by the Poppy. So Poppy is going to have a really difficult time snowballing these side lanes the way that Golden Guardians would kind of dream for. And that's continuing kind of my point of Poppy's only goal is to shadow Rek'Sai and don't let him snowball. You need to hope that the advantages you can pick up in the side lane, in the solo lanes, plus your bot lane's ability to try and survive and farm through this matchup is enough, because Poppy isn't really capable of extending a lead anywhere. She's only capable of really stopping Rek'Sai from doing much of anything with the really great kind of solo laners that TSM has managed to select for themselves. There's a 0% chance TSM is able to get anything in this little bush camp. Yeah, basically, Deathly would need to walk all the way up to here to make anything realistically happen. If Smoothie just Justice punches out, Deathly can just Q away, and Smoothie would need to flash taunt to follow up, in which case Deathly cleanses, walks away. If Smoothie flash taunts, Deathly cleanses, Qs away, is fine. There is no play here unless Deathly walks so far up that the Kalista slow can chase Deathly down before he can get to his turret. That's not going to happen unless he's standing really far up. So yeah, TSM loses nothing for waiting in the bush there. Kind of wishful thinking, but you never know. Sometimes poor players make mistakes like that. And we're already seeing the game is not going the way GGS wants it to, right? Rek'Sai has that CS advantage over Contracts, even though Contracts has accomplished nothing in this game, has not really been able to shut down this Rek'Sai at all. We're seeing, while there is a CS advantage in the mid lane, it is Froggen is not pressuring the Lissandra really in any way, which is really kind of contrary to what GGS wants to be doing. They need Froggen to have pressure. They need to kind of contain and try and shut down the TSM solo laners as much as possible to make this Vayne pick kind of work out. But Froggen doesn't have pressure in the lane. Bjergsen is able to roam into the Fog of War on the bottom side, which combined with the Rek'Sai pressure is able to force GGS off of their turret, losing more turret plates and more more survivability in the bottom lane. And TSM right now is doing a really solid job of snowballing their bottom lane. Now, this is really, really poor out of Golden Guardians. This is one of the most telegraphed plays I've seen in quite some time. And TSM should not be able to get kills out of this. This is a rotation that TSM is making because they want to force down the bottom lane turret so they can rotate their bot lane into the top lane, because the Drake has recently died. It's not going to be up for another few minutes. And TSM want to be able to use the pressure in their bottom lane to pick up turret plates in the top lane after taking down the bot lane turret. Rift Herald, I believe, is spawning fairly soon. So on top of that, rotating your bottom lane to the top lane with this huge pressure advantage you have kind of guarantees the Rift Herald. So TSM wants to use this kind of unexpected pressure in the mid lane, use the advantage they have in the jungle matchup, and advantage to have in the bottom lane to basically collapse down, force Golden Guardians away, take down the turret, rotate the bot lane, top lane, and basically do the same thing they've been doing, but now on the top lane turret, and with Rift Herald instead of Dragon. This is really telegraphed. We see basically at the start, Golden Guardians sees Bjergsen walking into the Fog of War. They ping him out. They know the dive is coming. They still choose to stay under their turret. They think they can counter out this dive, even though Froggen has no teleport and is not following in. And Contracts is just too late. Definitely does not have the DPS to have any impact in this, and they both die. Now, watching this play unfold, Contracts right here needs to start charging his ultimate. He needs to come in here and basically use the ultimate to get Sven and hopefully also Acadian just out of the fight. At that point, you can then finish off the Braum stun onto Smoothie, knock Smoothie under the turret with the Poppy dash, and condemn him then into the turret with the condemn, and try and kill the Galio as a trade kill. That's kind of the best case scenario in this play, and it is something that they should have been prepared to do because this play was so telegraphed. They shouldn't have been under the turret. They should have been ready to give up the turret. If they choose to defend the turret, they should have had a plan of how to do so. And Poppy mindlessly dashing in, trying to make an aggressive play instead of the defensive play, is really poor out of Golden Guardians, and it's pretty much never going to be successful, especially knowing Froggen is miles away with no teleport. So TSM is kind of really destroying GGS on the map right now. They needed to survive bottom lane and win their side lanes, basically. And TSM is now, yes, they haven't necessarily won the solo lanes, but they have managed to exert enough pressure in the bot lane due to all of these, what are frankly mechanical misplays from the side of GGS. And TSM is basically going to be able to remove any sort of pressure that the Golden Guardian solo laners would have had just by having so much pressure in the bottom lane. We're going to see TSM is not swapping their bot lane, going for the Infernal Drake first. That is valid. But basically, TSM is at a point where they can completely remove, for the most part, Deathly's ability to farm if they so choose, or they can apply pressure with their more powerful duo lane, basically have complete control over every single dragon, which are all infernals, lucky TSM, and the Rift Herald. And the Poppy is not able to expand the lead in the top lane like another jungler might have been able to. The Poppy is not able to expand the lead in the mid lane like another jungler might have been able to, or a different mid laner. So we're getting to a point where Golden Guardians has very little they can do. They really desperately needed to go fairly even in the bot lane and win their solo lanes by like a smallish CS margin, but like a little bit of a pressure advantage, which would allow them to come into the mid game pretty strong, with Vayne finally getting to hit her 2-item power spike and Swain and Aatrox kind of coming online. However, Golden Guardians fell too far behind in the bottom lane. They were unable to have the mid lane pressure that they needed, and now the bot lane pressure for TSM on its own is providing pressure on the rest of the map. So we're seeing Golden Guardians is no longer winning the mid lane. Yeah, there's a CS advantage. That's mostly because Bjergsen roamed and Froggen didn't. Golden Guardians is no longer winning the mid lane because Kalista can now, with the vision advantage in the bot side jungle, with having taken the bot lane turret, Kalista could just sit in the bottom lane and smoothly could go up and help the mid lane. We're going to see no more pressure top lane because TSM is now swapping their duo lane into the top side of the map. So Hauntzer is no longer going to be in a position where he can aggressively push any sort of lead onto Broken Blade. Yes, he could probably pick up a turret plate or two in the bottom lane once the swap is complete, but he needs to recall and walk bottom lane in order for that to happen. And in basically that amount of time, with the huge pressure advantage on the TSM bottom lane, if there are not more people coming up to help kind of stem the bleeding in this 2v2 matchup, TSM is going to get more. They're going to get a full turret versus 2 turret plates. TSM is getting the Herald for free anyway. That was guaranteed because of the way they were able to swap up their bottom lane. And there's very little that Golden Guardians can do about this. They, to some extent, were in a difficult position coming into this game because they had this losing bottom lane matchup and they were very dependent on winning the overall pressure game. But giving up Kalista when you want to pick Vayne, or finding yourself in the Vayne Kalista matchup, however that came about, is really, really poor for Golden Guardians. That's not something you should ever let happen. Both of the other aggro bot lane AD carries would have been better matchups. So the Lucian or the Draven both would have led to not as substantial of a lead for TSM as Kalista has. So letting either of those champions through, especially since you were planning on first picking the Braum anyway, would have been wise for Golden Guardians. And instead they found themselves in a really rough matchup that they just misplayed at a micro level, which caused the lane to snowball out of control, which then cost Golden Guardians the overall map pressure that they were dependent on. They needed their solo lanes to win by enough of a margin that the disadvantage and pressure in the bottom lane was overcome, and Golden Guardians could still have pressure in the mid and late game. That didn't happen, and they have now fallen behind to a point where the game is no longer salvageable. In order for the Golden Guardians to win this game, TSM needs to do basically nothing. GGS needs to... This Herald is going to take the mid turret. But GGS needs to basically be able to hold on this line as long as possible, even possibly giving up the side lane turrets and just holding this. That's very difficult given the incredibly limited wave clear on the side of GGS, given the ability of TSM to dive a turret very effectively, given that TSM is probably now favored in a 1-3-1 scenario, even though both of the solo laners are in disadvantageous matchups. And given that another Infernal Drake is spawning, right? GGS is so far behind, the only way that they can conceive of getting back into this game is if TSM is not able to do anything and the lead kind of remains stagnant for an extended period of time, and Golden Guardians is able to get to a position where you have 4 or 5 items on all of your carries, and this 5,000 plus gold lead is less and less relevant. However, TSM, all they need to do to basically stop that from happening is take the third Infernal Drake, because even if you get to a point where everybody has 6 items and the gold lead doesn't matter anymore, triple Infernal means you are still massively ahead. Golden Guardians here deludes themselves into thinking they have agency in this game, and they try and pick a fair fight, which goes about as well as you'd predict. Honestly, this goes better for Golden Guardians than it probably should have. Broken Blade held his ult for a really long time and isn't able to accomplish very much with it because of that. But I mean, this isn't a real team fight. There was no way Golden Guardians was ever going to be able to accomplish anything picking a fight like this. And you could consider it desperation. You could consider it basically Golden Guardians conceding the game without actually conceding the game. But there was no way they could have done anything there. And it feels miserable to be playing a game of League of Legends and know that there is actually nothing you can do, but you're forced to kind of be here for another 10 minutes as the other team actually finishes the game. But that's pretty much, like, Golden Guardians is in a hurry to get out of this game. Go next, go next. So they're taking fights they can't win, and, I mean, this is the result. Triple Infernal, huge gold advantage. There's nothing that GGS can do right now. So, watching this fight commence, it starts out as a 4v4. Froggen teleports an incredibly short distance because he needs a flank. Now, if everybody on TSM right here just walks in to GGS, we see the Poppy ult does come out, which kind of stops that from being an option. But TSM kind of opted. Like, they were running away from the Aatrox, and as a result, they piled on to the Zhonya's Swain, which is really exactly what GGS wants. They want TSM to run away from Aatrox and be trying to deal with this huge Swain damage so that the Vayne can free hit. But TSM had such a lead that they could kind of survive all of that damage. And I think the way they could have won that fight even harder is if instead of just kind of piling on to the Swain, they had left 1 or 2 members, maybe just the Callista, just dealing with the Swain, because Callista is probably strong enough to deal with the Swain at this point. And pressure the rest of GGS away, kill Swain for free. Or do what they did. Once Swain burns his Zhonya's, everybody just dogpile onto the rest of GGS, get out of the Swain AoE instead of trying to kite away through the Swain AoE. That is arguably a riskier play. However, if TSM had played that team fight the way they did and had not had a massive advantage, it would have been a lost fight for them. So, at this point, the Baron hasn't spawned yet, and all TSM really needs to do is put their pressure onto the bottom side of the map. They don't need to push down this bottom lane turret, but they just picked up a kill. The Baron isn't up yet, so they don't need to be pressuring topside at all. And TSM has this kind of perfect opportunity to shove down this bottom lane turret, have a little bit of extra pressure in the bottom lane before you need to rotate up to the top side of the map to shut down Golden Guardian's vision in the blue side jungle and take control of the Baron pit. If I were TSM, I would really like to see Acadian actually coming down and helping just push down this turret as fast as possible, possibly even Bjergsen delaying his recall to come in and shove down this turret. Just because having the extra gold before the upcoming Baron fight, yes, you're already massively ahead and you have triple Infernals and blah, 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 but that turret was basically free at that point, and you aren't gaining much from not picking it up, and TSM would have gotten more from being able to just nab that turret there. They had the defensive vision in the Golden Guardian's red side jungle to protect that play, and it would have, yes, it wasn't necessary, it would have expanded their lead yet further. But Baron is up. TSM, basically, it's the classic take control of vision in the other team's Baron side jungle. Don't let them contest the Baron. Take the Baron for free. You are that far ahead. It's really easy. And even if the Baron were not a factor, if the Baron is not spawning for another 3 minutes, or for some reason Golden Guardians is able to defend the Baron, even though they should realistically never be able to do so, all that TSM really needs to do is maintain pressure in all 3 lanes, if possible. Yes, it's hard to do with these solo lane matchups, as we're seeing in the bottom lane. But take control of vision, deny as many jungle camps from Golden Guardians as possible, and kind of, it's okay to let the game stall a little bit. You have this Vladimir that is hyperscaling. Yes, there's a Vayne that scales well into the late game and blah, 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 but you have 3 Infernals. You have a Vladimir. You have everything you could ever want in a game of League of Legends at this point. So instead of getting the bottom lane turret before the Baron happens, they go for the mid lane turret. And Golden Guardian, once again, picks a fair fight, which is never going to work for them. I think Contracts is kind of antsy to get out of this game, but that fight was never going to work. If you're Golden Guardians and your goal is to just go next, walking too far forward in the mid lane like that, or flanking and taking a 4v4 fight when behind 10k gold and 3 Infernals is a great way to get the enemy team to actually stop dicking around and actually just take the Baron and end the game. So, like, A+ to GGS, they know they've lost, and they are embracing that and trying to get things over quickly. That's the only explanation I can come up for GGS making this place. There is no realistic strategic reason why you would ever try and do something like that. But there is also no realistic world in which Golden Guardians ever wins this game. So, it doesn't really matter. TSM end up trading the bottom lane turret for the Baron. I don't think that was a necessary trade. I'm not sure when exactly the Vladimir walks up here. Right here, Vladimir walks up, and I guess the Vladimir flank to some extent makes this fight happen. No, never mind. Vladimir is completely unnecessary here. And Vladimir could very easily have just walked back into the bottom lane. TSM should have sent Vladimir bottom again and defended that bottom lane turret. Just because, like, denying the enemy gold is more valuable than getting gold yourself. And, you know, yeah, they've already won the game, but it's really kind of a hey, why not? There's a 0% chance GGS can contest the Baron anyway. You have teleport on your Vlad, so as long as you're keeping Aatrox with you, like, and even if you don't keep Aatrox with you, the Vlad can always just TP into the Baron pit anyway. So there is really no reason for TSM to see that bottom lane turret. It gives Golden Guardians a little bit of extra gold, which, yeah, surges their goal towards getting these item spikes onto the Vayne and onto the Aatrox and onto the Swain and getting back into the game's over. It's not relevant. But the game would be cleaner. Would be a perfect game, blah blah blah, if Program Blade had just stayed bottom lane. It's playing out games like these, especially stage games like these. It's all about being as clean as possible. And when you get to this point in the game, or I mean, the point in the game that they were at 10 minutes ago, where there was no longer a way for Golden Guardians to actually win the game, it comes down to closing out as cleanly and effectively as possible. And to some extent, if you're already guaranteed the win, practicing making those correct macro decisions that, to as much of a degree as possible, shut down any possible enemy outplay. And you could argue that the possible enemy outplay in that situation was, by some miracle, Hanser is able to get into the Baron pit and contest the Baron and steal the Baron or kill a member of TSM. So having the extra member of Broken Blade at the Baron pit was valuable to that extent. The odds of that happening are basically 0, the odds of that extra burst of gold onto GGS translating into enough damage to pick off a member of TSM are also incredibly low, but somewhat higher. So to some extent, it comes to, you've already won the game. You should now focus on practice to some extent, working on making those ideal macro decisions, because you may find yourself at a later state in a game where that one turret would make a difference because you don't have 3 Inferno Drakes and they have the scaling composition. So really, the game was over for a really long time. TSM could have played it a little more cleanly, but as it was, they had such a massive advantage coming out of the early game that there was basically nothing GGS could do. TSM could have done pretty much whatever they wanted and won the game. They did make most of the basic macro moves you would expect from a team that is that far ahead. They did shut Golden Guardians out of their jungle. They did push down those turrets and deny GGS vision on any of the neutral objectives. They dominated all of the neutral objectives. They rotated their bottom lane up when they needed to. Really, really clean game from TSM. I've said a number of times the main strength of TSM is their laning phase. They consistently come out of laning phase with a significant advantage. So, and see a lot more of their weaknesses in the late game decision making stage. So an ideal game from TSM is winning the lane so hard that you get to a point where you can make whatever decisions you want and still come out ahead. And this is kind of exactly what happened in this game. GGS made some really bad micro errors in the bottom lane early on, and ultimately it cost them the game. And it can be frustrating as someone who's interested in macro play and all of these things to see a game that is decided by really a few small micro mistakes. But League of Legends is a game of inches. The macro game ultimately, for the most part, is a guaranteed way of getting small advantages over time. And if you are able to pick up large advantages because your opponent makes a big mistake and hands it to you, the correct play is to take advantage of that and get to a point where the macro no longer matters. It is it shows off a very significant mismatch in player skill between the members of TSM and the members of Golden Guardians, which I would expect. TSM as an organization has always been about having the best players and leveraging that into enough of an advantage to win the game without making significant macro decisions. And they were able to do so very, very well in this game. So, really solid game from TSM. They are looking like they can absolutely take games off of anybody. Should they win the laning phase as intensely as they have been able to do. However, there have been a lot of TSM games where they are unable to translate that lead in the laning phase into a significant advantage later on. And if TSM, say, were to end up at MSI, I believe they would have a really difficult time because a lot of the top teams elsewhere in the world have incredibly strong players in their lanes and don't make these kind of laning phase errors that lead to giving up advantages in the laning phase. And all of these international top tier teams that have these really good players also are playing a better, or they're playing the macro game, and they are showing that they can macro very effectively, whilst TSM wins by winning the laning phase so hard they don't need to macro. And if they are forced to macro, a lot of their macro in the mid and late game specifically, their early game macro is really solid. We saw them swapping up their bottom lane when they needed to and getting all of those objectives like they needed to, or like they were able to. But TSM's macro game in the mid and late game is a little more questionable. We see them throwing games like they did to Cloud9. And I would not be surprised if TSM, if they were to go to MSI, would find themselves against the likes of Caps and against the likes of Uzi, or the Shy, and losing the laning phase, or at least going even in the laning phase, and then not being able to stand up in the mid and late game because they are not at the same level from a macro standpoint as a lot of these other teams are. So that was TSM versus Golden Guardians. A bit of a TSM rant at the end, as I'm sure everybody has a few TSM rants. But that was TSM versus GGS. Really solid looking game from TSM. I'm excited to see them moving into playoffs. I'm John Valentine. Thanks for watching.